Hello and welcome to this edition of Dr. K's Psychobabble. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite theorists. Of course, I like them all, but that's David Elkind. Now, David Elkind is an interesting character, and we're going to take a look at him first. Get a little bit know about David, and then we can look at one of his theories. David Elkind is a professor emeritus in child development at Tufts University. It's his current gig that's going on. He is extremely famous within the world of child development and early childhood education. And he was particularly famous for his books that he came out. And some of the famous books that he has include The Hurried Child, which was actually sort of on the front burner during the Joan Benet murder mystery that really brought up to light about the idea of having children in these beauty pageants. And The Hurried Child was sort of a book that was highlighted in that controversy. Other books that he also wrote include Miseducation, and that's preschoolers at risk, All Grown Up and No Place to Go, Teenagers in Crisis, and a very useful book, Parenting Your Teenager. But probably some of the unknown to many people, unless you spend some time on this platform, is that David Elkind is a tremendous contributor to WebMD. In fact, he does a lot of the question and answer and posting of articles related to psychology and child development. So if you look up questions on WebMD regarding child development, you might see David Elkind's face pop up every once in a while. In fact, quite often. For today, though, I want to look at his theory of adolescent egocentrism. And that has been a part of my teaching of developmental psych since I began 20 years ago. And it's always been it's a key part of my puzzle pieces theory in terms of understanding the kind of normative ways in which we enter into this this area of identity development in adolescence that I then pursue in my theory in young adulthood. But adolescent egocentrism describes a collection of attributes that we associate with children who are adolescents. They're in that adolescent stage. It's a cognitive style, developmental style, or the perceptions of the world, kind of all these issues coming together in terms of neurological development, the not quite connected amygdala system with the prefrontal cortex. So you see the risk-taking kind of behavior, but all perceptions of the world that are abstract in terms of, let's say, Piaget's development of formal operational thinking, but they're not quite adult-like yet. They're not quite as comprehensive. They're still under development. So it's important, first of all, as we look at these attributes and attempt to understand how adolescents think, that these attributes are normal, that they are challenging to parents, they're challenging to teachers, they're challenging to friends. These are rapidly changing aspects of cognition, and some of them don't sort of make sense, let's say, and they're challenging to deal with those things. And parents are tasked to address them. We have to confront them. We have to try to understand where our children are coming from. I have a little bit of advice at the end in terms of some things that parents can do in regard to these things. Now, so let's take on, under the umbrella of adolescent egocentrism, there are three components to that. But let's look at that egocentrism point. Now, when we think about someone who's egocentric, it's a person whose focus is on themselves. that they want the focus to be on them, that their priorities are to meet their own needs prior to others. And so this is a characteristic of adolescent thinking that has been recorded throughout history, this sort of self-centeredness, self-focus. We see it in stories, we see it in the media, we see it in history, where adolescents have played out that role of being self-centered. We see it in Erikson's theory, in that adolescence is sort of that identity thing. It's about me now. This is the period of time I'm going to be looking at, trying to define and sort of using these new cognitive abilities that I have now that I'm according to Piaget, a formal operational thinker. Now that I can think abstract and I can consider the future, I'm going to start really using those to define who I am, to make some of those decisions, to try out different selves, and to go through that process. Now, because the cognition aspect and social interaction aspect of our human development is still developing at this point, there are some characteristics that Elkind outlined. So this egocentrism has that sort of negative connotation to it, but keep in mind that's supposed to be what's going on right now. It's supposed to be a time of focusing. Even within our culture, in American culture, right around adolescence, when we're asking children to consider their future, to consider consequence, to consider maybe what they want to do when they grow up, we are asking them to spend some time thinking about themselves. It's a sort of a cultural expectation as they are preparing themselves to enter into adulthood. So let's take a look at each one of these characteristics that Elkind puts forth to help us kind of understand what makes up the building blocks, let's say, of what we see of as the sort of egocentric mentality. Now, the first one that Elkind gives us is imaginary audience. Now, imaginary audience portrays the child as seeing themselves continually on stage. So they walk into the cafeteria at school, and every casual glance that is in their direction, whether it's close by, someone's far away, it may look like they're looking at you, but they may have a sense that people are watching them, that they are performing, that they are being evaluated by these people around them. And so they're very conscientious, maybe overly conscientious of the fact of public image, of what they look, the style, how they behave, who they're hanging around with, their reputation, all of these things. That becomes sort of central to their social interactions and what they're doing. And sometimes to the degradation of other aspects of their life. So I'm sure many of you remember in the time that you were teenagers, or teenagers that you know, can understand how this manifests itself. The second characteristic that Elkind gives us is a perception of invulnerability. And this is kind of can be conceived of a number of different ways. First, there's the kind of really building of that connection between the amygdala and the self-gratification needs that the brain has, and the frontal cortex that's for executive functioning and making good decisions and weighing the pros and cons of particular actions. That connection is still working itself out, so that the frontal cortex or the prefrontal cortex can have a mitigating effect on the impulse of adolescence for doing things. There's also, in terms of the lifespan, they're at this age, with this perception of future, their life at this point, unless they've encountered a near-death experience, or they're aware of their own illness or something like that, there's this sort of sense that personal mortality is really far away at this point. That happens way later. It's off the drawing board right now. It's on the back burner. And therefore, this notion that I don't have to worry about those things. I'm young, I'm strong, I'm healthy, all of these things they kind of laid out. And of course, that's different for people who have illnesses or people who live around illnesses or have had to deal with that or have been in accidents. Sometimes that's what we might say a wake-up call to our vulnerability. But the danger of this particular notion is that it may develop a sense of it won't happen to me. I can do things and other people get hurt when they do those things, but it's not going to happen to me. I'm in control of mine. And that can certainly, as you can well imagine, can be fairly problematic. And the last component that Elkind gives us is personal fable. Now, personal fable, now think of what a fable is. It's a story. My story. Okay, but it's a imagined story. So a fable about something that has happened. You think about the old children's stories and whatnot, the fables. Now, a personal fable is maybe what we experience as adults when we talk to kids and we're trying to get in touch with their world and what's going on. And sometimes in frustration, they may say, "You don't understand. Our world is different than when you were a kid." And that's a piece of it, but there's also, even among their peers, there's this sense that the things that they're going through, the frustrations, the growing up, the challenges in school, the challenges with relationships, that they're experiencing them in a unique way that has never been experienced before, and others will fail to understand them. So we have these three characteristics that we can see all kinds of examples in our own lives and the lives of people around us. But sometimes it's truth. And I think I want to point that out before we go into too far into, how do we respond to this, is that even though we see these characteristics as the product of immature cognition, immature social cognitive process in the child, at the same time, there are also certain realities associated with this. And one of the ways in which we can connect to adolescents as adults is to recognize the realities of these things. So the imaginary audience is sometimes not that imaginary. They are sometimes on the stage and being judged by their peers and who they hang out with and their reputations. That there's truth to that. Putting everything into that, weighing out the importance of that versus other things in life, that's what parents can provide guidance on. The perception of invulnerability. They are strong. They are physically active. They have these things, and yet we have to try and harness that to help them make good decisions about what is okay risky behavior and what is not okay risky behavior, and still get that sense of excitement that childhood is, and then enable them to experiment and understand things about the world through that sort of adventure thinking. And finally, this idea of personal fable. Now, we as adults, we know that the emotional ups and downs and the challenges of being an adolescent are shared universally. These are one of the clear aspects of, particularly in Western culture, that adolescence is a period of transition from childhood to adulthood, and it can be a challenging task. At the same time, there are some significant differences, let's say, from when I was an adolescent. Certainly social media is a huge part of the media itself, the environmental conflict, the availability and utilization rate of drugs and alcohol and all that, much higher than I believe it was when I was an adolescent, and sexuality. Those kinds of things. All of these, they are a different world. The principles are the same. The idea of struggling with identifying yourself, understand the relationship with your parents, your family of origin, and your peers, your sense of future and responsibility and the burden of that, and truthfully sort of a death of childhood or the innocence of non-consequence and people being there to take care of your needs, transitioning into adulthood when you are going to be responsible for your own survival, and your life now becomes principally your fault. It's now up to you, to take it forward and whatnot. Those are universal, but the world is a different place. So when we're looking at countering this as adults, as parents, or teachers, or as anybody working with adolescents, there's some kind of 4 ways to kind of like address this with them. The first is connect. And I think connecting is to actually use these terms: imaginary audience, not so imaginary, perceptions of invulnerability, what's real danger, what's risk-taking, those kind of things. And the fable, what is different between when I was a kid and when you were a kid, but what's the same? Principally what the same, connecting with some of those things and having those conversations, sharing personal experiences with those and whatnot, to form some connection with the kids so they understand that they're not alone. Think of your own childhood when you were there, your perceptions of your parents at that time. How much involvement did you want them to have at that time? How much autonomy did you want? And making a good decision as to, what battle to fight and what not to fight. And maybe your principles become very, what used to be a complex set of expectations become very simple expectations. Like, okay, I understand you're going to be going this wayward path, but here's the bottom line. Here's the new bottom line. I want to support you through this process, but there's going to be a new bottom line. And providing that structure as to what your expectations are, while again supporting their adventure through their transition into adulthood. Understanding that this too shall pass. This is a stage, it's a normative stage, it's something that we should expect. If you don't have teenagers yet, this is a good time to watch this video because it's telling you what's going to happen. They're going to go through this adolescent egocentrism place. You understand it as a stage, you're prepared to connect with them, remember your own childhood was there, and understand that this will come to an end. And they will emerge, hopefully, on the other side, a responsible adult. And finally, we introduce ideas to them. Rather than the role that we had before of more providing direction, this is what you should do, that kind of thing. Maybe we just we embrace the idea that these are thinking individuals now. They are embracing thoughts and notions and possible futures, and we can just start throwing ideas out there. What about this? What about this? Have you considered this? Just in a way that doesn't say, hey, I'm telling you as your parent or adult what to do, but in a way that says there's even more options than the ones that you're looking at, and say here's them all. In fact, it may be that when they truly understand all the different options, that's when they may come back to us and say, help me narrow this down a little bit because it's kind of overwhelming to have all of these options, and that will be the chance for some other teaching. So there's our theory from Elkind, his notion of adolescent egocentrism, a challenging but normal and very appropriate stage for people to go through, not only the adolescents, but the family and the other people that care about them as well. So have a great day, and don't forget to subscribe and click the little notification so you can know when new videos come out. So have a great day.